Welcome to the first episode of In China Between Meetings with your host Marian Danko, aka China Hustler. We talk about innovation, technology, entrepreneurship. This series of interviews brought to you by weHustle, a Shanghai-based platform for innovation and growth. We help international and local teams succeed in China. I'm excited today to be joined by Sunny Ting, Digital Innovation Scout at BI Digital Labs and also co-director of Startup Grind Shanghai chapter. Welcome, Sunny.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for accommodating, for taking this in between meetings.
Great. I know you for a while. I know you're from Hong Kong, but I don't know your Shanghai story. When and how did you move to Shanghai, and what did you do before BI? And yes, please do help me to pronounce BI, what it stands for.
Okay. I probably cannot pronounce it too. How do you say? I can't pronounce it too properly either. But the way that you pronounce BI is Boehringer Ingelheim. It's a combination of two words from the family name Boehringer and Ingelheim, the city in Germany where our company originated from. Coincidentally, now that it's approaching Chinese New Year, a lot of people ask me, am I going home, where I'm from? And it's a complicated question to answer, because do you answer it from the angle where you're from, where you grew up, where your heritage is, or it's a complicated story. So I was born in Taiwan. I grew up in...
I didn't know that.
I grew up in Hong Kong, and then my father is Shanghainese. So I spent most of my time growing up in Hong Kong and did my studies in the US. Then I decided to come to China, take a stab at it and see what it's like in China. I did a couple trips to Shanghai before graduating, and I thought this was a city that was quite similar to Hong Kong, and I said maybe this would be a good opportunity. So I came by to do some things in digital. I think in the era when everything in China was starting just to go digital in 2010, 2011. So I've been here for about a good 10 years now, doing a couple different things. So a bit of digital system integrations, and also the next part of my career in healthcare, which was also what I studied. So you could say I took a big loop around back into my studies. So quite interesting. So at my current role right now at Boehringer Ingelheim, as a digital innovation scout, we do a lot of different things, which I'll talk about in a bit. But my previous experiences in the second half of my journey in Shanghai is more related to doing healthcare and innovation related work. So I was at a design and innovation agency, and then afterwards I transitioned into corporate, where I was at another German multinational company responsible for their open innovation program at Bayer. It was called G4A, formerly known as Grants for Apps.
Right. So recently I think we hear a lot of digital innovation, corporate innovation, digital labs, and you are part of it at the moment. So can you describe what do you do exactly, what are your KPIs, and what is the career path for people like you working in this industry?
I like it. You're going straight to the heart of the problem. What is the KPI? Maybe let's talk a little bit about these innovation centers a little bit first. So in my previous role, I was also in, you could say, an innovation unit of a larger company, right? A lot of times what these units do is look at things that are a little bit more middle to long term. So this could be, let's say, something that is strategically focused, that is not, let's say, immediately clear on what the returns are or what the, let's say, business impacts are. But these are things that are important and necessary for the organization's growth and sustained growth. So in in, let's say, both in my current role and my previous role, it was a very traditional German multinational pharmaceutical company. And to do something so, let's say, unique and dynamic is actually quite difficult for the people who were there already to understand and to consider. So we have a couple of different roles. We take the role of what we call a change manager, mindset change, digital change, and all sorts of types of, let's say, idea portfolio management change. And so, of course, different companies, based on the scope of their innovation unit, they would do things a little bit differently. So some may have a corporate venture unit that is part of this. Some may have, let's say, a full team of builders, and some are looking specifically just to work with people outside of the organization. So you have a lot of different types of setup where I've been parts of two setups that one is more focused on partnering outside or helping people outside. So that was when doing accelerators and incubators were quite popular. And so depending on the dynamic and your needs, it fits to different organizations. So in our current setup, what BIX, what we call BIX Digital Labs, X stands for the endless future and possibilities that we have, right? Kind of like in maths, it's a bit unknown, right? So what we do is we bring a lot of multidisciplinary people together. We have strategists, we have designers, and we have builders that come together with our business units to create solutions that would matter to their business and also to our healthcare ecosystem. So if you think about it this way, drugs are becoming harder and harder to do research on and to come up with new products, right? And so a lot of people now are looking at different ways to be able to generate a lot of, let's say, improved patient outcomes and also patient, let's say, experiences. But the focus may not only just be on patients, because we also need to consider the doctors, the nurses, and maybe even, let's say, ambulance drivers and such. So we need to think more in terms of the ecosystem. So when we come together with these multidisciplinary areas, we're really looking at what are the opportunities and where are the growth opportunities that make sense for the organization. So I think it's quite a number of things that come together that culminate quite an interesting organization, and we help a lot of different business units to really think a little bit outside the box, challenge them a little bit, and to really understand what the core of the problem is. Because a lot of times people will come to you with a solution, but the problem is something that is not, let's say, the right one, or it's not at that kind of level where you're understanding the right problem.
So when the corporates are deciding to open up the innovation department or digital lab, where do they scout for employees? How do they find these people?
So I think it depends. I only answered part of your question, right? So there are two parts to it, I think. One is you're coming from, let's say, a subject matter expert. So maybe someone from the business unit, someone from the ecosystem that is within the kind of business. These kind of people would come in from one angle, where they would maybe get more innovation management framework, or let's say different types of they want to bring different, let's say, digital ideas to life. The other way would be from people who have these kind of multidisciplinary thinking, but they're coming from, let's say, the different opportunities that are available. So you have these kind of different dynamics where some innovation hubs, they have people that are coming from the subject matter expert side, and they also have some people who are technologists or strategists that come together. But I would say the two need to come together so that you have the good stuff in the middle that forms. Or let's say let's say, for example, soap and water. It needs to have come together and maybe rub a little so that you get the bubbles, right?
Right.
So you would see it kind of in two ways, but in general, I think there's no perfect way that you would say, I'm trying to look for someone. It definitely needs to be someone who is positive, someone who is very open and okay with what we call the fuzziness, the uncertainties, and they are able to really think about what the next step is. So a lot of people that are maybe doing BD are good for these kind of roles, but also people who have a good understanding of how do you drive something to land tangibly. These people are also quite good at doing this.
How about people with the entrepreneurial background?
Yeah, absolutely. I think entrepreneurs, they bring a very different flavor to an organization, right? And that's why you would see some of these kind of individuals outside of let's say an organization a lot of times. Traditionally, you have people in corporate or entrepreneurship. It's rarely where you find, let's say, someone within a corporate that is, let's say, very entrepreneurial minded, which, it's quite unique in China. China is a bit of a mix where people are inherently very savvy business owners,
right,
or they want to create businesses or have this desire to create businesses. But a lot of them want that kind of, let's say, stability or fallback within the corporate. So you get a really interesting mix where if you're creating, let's say, what we call a new ventures, a new service line, or a new product within a corporate, sometimes it's an extension, sometimes it's a completely new kind of line of business, but some are also what we call incremental businesses, right? So think of Oreo again, right? They made a thinner version, so you could think of that as an incremental, right? Whereas, let's say, if you make Oreos in a different form, that might be a new offering. But if you create a completely new product, then that's at another level of kind of what we call the innovation. So the management of these innovations is what we would say is very, very important and critical, and knowing how to make these different innovations land. I think that's also the second step, but is also something that you should not forget at the first step. So those, I would say, are, and depending on how much of a return the organization wants, right? The KPIs are stronger or more kind of strict in different kind of cases. So I've seen, let's say, KPIs for some of these organizations to be how many ideas do you have in the funnel that you land, right? Kind of like you have 10 startups and only one in the end is able to get funding in a later stage.
Talking about the startups and entrepreneurship, right? Let's take another step forward in this direction. You're also a part of the Startup Grind community. Why, working for the corporates, you decided to spend your time and volunteer for building up the entrepreneurial communities?
Right. So maybe to take another kind of roll back a little bit as well. So I joined Startup Grind when before I joined corporates. So that was when I was doing a bit of BD, and it was an interesting time period. I was looking to maybe get to know more people, to see where let's say business opportunities are. But at the first event that I joined, I felt that, hey, this was a very different kind of community. This was a community that was very professional. The people that come are from a lot of different and diverse backgrounds. And as I started to dig more and hear about the organization, the values really just resounded with what I also consider as my values, and also what I think is important for creating bonds between people, right? The three key pillars that we have is giving first, helping others, and making friends, right? And out and out in all the events that we do. And I joined the organization as it was also growing and starting to create something interesting. We during the first year that I joined, we were actually in progress of planning something quite spectacular, which we have now turned into a very successful franchise, the China Startup Ecosystem Summit. Back then, it was called Summer Party.
Summer Party, right?
Right, and I believe that's also around when you joined as well. But that was, you know, when it really started, and the team started to meld and form and kind of create this kind of pot of different innovation ecosystem communities coming together. You have corporates, you have venture capital, you have startups, you have service providers, government. It was something that was quite unique, and I think it was something that really echoed with what I wanted to do. And as I started to volunteer more and into corporate through my transition into another corporate innovation type of organization, these are things that I think I'm able to bring things in to our organization, but also use the resources that are coming together in this kind of community to benefit other people within the community. So I think even in healthcare as well, why does our organization, why does our team exist? It's because there's more of an ecosystem play today in comparison to maybe 10, 15 years ago. Things were maybe a bit more linear, but now the linear is, you know, different circles of things going around.
Thank you. And so you have the unique position tapping into both worlds, startup and corporate. And when it comes to the startup corporate collaboration, definitely there are lots of challenges. Could you think about top 3 challenges when it comes to the startup corporate collaboration?
I think top 3, I can name a few, but I think if there's one very critical one, it's really understanding what the core of the business problem is. Because if you think of it this way, right, for a startup, the critical thing that they have to get clear is product market fit, right? Knowing who your customers are and what problems it solves for them. And in the end, if you think of that from, let's say, a lean startup point of view, it's why should a customer give you money? It's in the end about how you can solve someone's problem and they will give you the money for it, right? And so I think a lot of times what we see in the ecosystem, or even let's say when we do deal flow or sourcing of startups, the understanding of the ecosystem, what the problem is for the corporate, it's sometimes not very clear. So when the discussion happens, let's say as an innovation unit, we need to be clear on what the problem is internally as well, so that we can articulate it for the externals. But at the same time, when the externals come with, let's say, their technology or their resources, then it needs to also match up so that it creates something that is, you know, it generates a business outcome, right? So if it's, let's say, adopting a technology in a factory for improving the efficiency, you know, that's a kind of traditional case where, you know, it's a very typical kind of situation. But when the startup that you're working with is not able to understand what the scenario is, that's one issue. If they're not able to deliver on the scenario, that's also another issue. So I think understanding the problem is at the core, where later on you have other things that would also happen to, you know, be very critical to this partnership. So if there was one, so just to twist your answer a bit, not to give you 3, but if there's one, it's really understanding what the business problem is and knowing if you can deliver on it. Right.
Any China-specific challenge?
Any China-specific challenges?
That probably doesn't exist outside of China, but in China, when corporates are trying to run it, they need to really pay attention to it.
I think it's not really a problem. It's a bit of a kind of, I would put it
Difference?
more, I think it's more of a unique, something unique to the China ecosystem. People in China are quite, let's say, rigorous when it comes to business outcomes. They're very savvy, and especially, let's say, if it's a local company, especially, if it doesn't have that kind of MNC multinational flavor to it, then they are very particular about what the business outcomes are, right? Because in the end, for them, they're looking at a much shorter term, which is not a bad thing. It's just the culture that they grew up in, right? And so when you couple that with the China speed, then that really becomes something that needs to be very, how do you say, you need to be very strong and ambitious and also capable. And at the same time, when you're fighting against an ecosystem where there's a lot of great talent, right? If you take, for example, where you're from Ukraine, right? You have a lot of these kind of tech entrepreneurs or tech talents or capabilities within the ecosystem. So if you're competing against people in that kind of same market, you also have to be upskilling all the time. You have to be learning the new tips and trades all the time. And when the ecosystem develops so quickly, you can imagine staying alive or doing things within China is just so much more dynamic and quick. Where if you're sitting there for maybe 3-4 months, maybe your competitor has a new function that is already able to cover your revenues as well,
right,
and take your businesses. And when it's, let's say, Tencent, WeChat, or someone that comes up with this function, hey,
Not many options.
not many options are left. So I think this is not really how do you say, a China-specific problem, but you may see it a bit more, how do you say, drastic in China, especially.
Right. Can you think about 1 or 2 examples of successful startup corporate collaboration?
I think this is also a pretty tough question. I don't want to give any names, but maybe to give out some good practices.
Right.
I think it would be important. In corporate startup programs, what I see is the most critical is the involvement of top management and their ability to push through this kind of change. Because back to your question about KPIs, right? If it's inherently, people in China are quite, let's say, savvy about these kind of things, and if it's not, let's say, directly related to their value or their pockets as well, then they're very, unless they have a passion for this thing, then it's really hard to push. And remember back when we were talking about change management, it's all about change. How do you create change? How do you make change easier? How do you make change easier to adopt? How do you let it land easier? If you have top level support, I think that's one critical point to corporate innovation, corporate startup partnership success, right? The second part is, I think, about funding. I think we're past the era of doing things for free, and I think when someone, let's say, for an entrepreneur, when they're doing things for free, it's actually not a good thing. Their motivations are very different. So being able to bring money to the table is important, not only for the people externally, right, but it's also important for the people internally, because when you go onto the poker table, if you don't have money for the blinds, what are you going to do, right? You don't even have the right to be there to play. You're in a sense a spectator, right? So sometimes really being able to bring money to the table is also important, so that you have the right to play there, but at the same time you're really helping drive some of these things that are middle long term, that are important to the organization, but is not an immediate, let's say, is not something that is immediately needed, but is important for the middle to long term of the organization. And I think all of those things really come together, where in the end, then people really start to look at what are the business outcomes. And corporates are, I would say, more robust. So people tend to stay within a corporate environment for many, many years. And when they look back, and say, hey, this function, this innovation unit has been here for 2, 3 years, 4 years, what are some of the outcomes that they have? It's not just about doing some events, doing some programs. It's really, hey, they've done something that helped me grow my business and help the organization grow the business. So I think those are the 3 things that are critical to corporate innovation success and sustained corporate innovation success. Not necessarily just partnerships with startups, but that would also be part of this whole framework.
Correct. Thank you very much. And the final question before you go to your next meeting: what is innovation for you?
Something fun. It has to be something fun. I like to be in a discussion, a workshop, in an environment where the dialogue between me and the person who has the idea, what we call the idea owner, this person should be very engaged and passionate about what they want to do or the idea that they're talking about, right? And I think the fun part really then comes, it shows when you talk about an idea that you're passionate about. And when we talk about, let's say, problem solving, it also needs to be a bit playful, a bit fun, right? So that you're looking at it not from, hey, these are, some big challenges. This is, you want to really think about it from how you solve the problem, and solving it in different ways, solving it in a fun way, it just makes things, a bit easier. You're framing it in a different angle.
Right. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Happy to share some thoughts.
So please do subscribe to our channel on WeChat and YouTube, like and leave a comment, and stay tuned for the next episode coming soon in China Between Meetings.